Get out, sir. This is the VIP section. The security guard's voice echoed across the hall. The elderly man had just placed his hand on the chair, his eyes not yet adjusted to the bright lights. Everyone turned away, pretending not to notice. No one said a word until an American general walked in and stood at attention, saluting him in front of the entire assembly. Who was this old man that made the military stop in their tracks? Type unfair if you think the initial treatment was unacceptable. Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Harold J. Nolan arrived at the Austin Military Museum 30 minutes early. At 79, he moved slower these days, and wanted time to find a seat before the Veterans Memorial Service began. He wore his old jacket, not a formal uniform, just a civilian coat with a few tarnished medals pinned carefully to the breast pocket. Under his arm he carried a canvas-wrapped photo album, its edges singed and worn from decades of handling. The main entrance displayed a prominent sign, Honor Reception Area, reserved for distinguished military guests. Harold didn't notice, he simply followed the stream of well-dressed attendees, seeking a quiet spot near the back where he could sit unnoticed. The auditorium gleamed with polished wood and brass. Military flags lined the walls. Distinguished men and women in uniform mingled with politicians and donors in expensive suits. Harold found an empty chair in the third-to-last row. As he bent to place his photo album on the seat, his knees protested with a sharp pain, a reminder of shrapnel wounds from a war most people in the room were too young to remember. A young security officer approached immediately, his pressed black uniform and earpiece projecting authority. "Excuse me, sir, this section is not open to the general public. I need you to move to the designated public seating area." Harold looked up, confusion crossing his weathered face. "I'm sorry, this section is reserved for official guests only." The guard's voice carried, causing nearby conversations to falter. "You'll need to relocate to the public gallery." Heads turned, eyes assessed Harold's worn appearance, his simple clothes, his aged hands gripping the photo album. A well-dressed woman whispered to her companion, just loud enough to be heard, "How did he even get in here?" Another man snickered, probably confused, wandered in from the street. Harold slowly stood, his back straightening as much as his old injuries would allow. 6 decades of dignity wouldn't permit him to argue. "I didn't realize," he said softly. "I only came to remember my friends." The security guard reached for his radio, preparing to call for assistance to escort Harold out. "Sir, if you don't move voluntarily, I'll need..." A deep voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Stand down, officer. That man is not leaving." The command carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. The guard froze. Harold turned, and in the sudden silence everyone watched as a tall figure in full-dress uniform strode purposefully across the polished floor toward them. 4 silver stars gleamed on each shoulder. The entire assembly fell silent, as General William Tate, current member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, walked directly toward Harold Dempsey. His measured steps echoed against marble floors. Harold stood motionless, one hand still clutching his photo album, as the 4-star general approached. 3 feet from Harold, General Tate stopped. His posture shifted to perfect attention. Then, with precise military form, he raised his right hand in a formal salute. "Sir, it's an honor." The security guard went pale, his radio forgotten in his limp hand. Whispers erupted throughout the hall as phones emerged to capture the unexpected scene. "Who is that old man? Why is General Tate saluting him?" Harold returned the salute with a practiced motion of someone who had done so thousands of times, though not for many years. General Tate turned to the security officer, whose face had drained of all color. "This gentleman will be seated at the front with the distinguished guests. Please escort him to the first row." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir," the guard stammered, suddenly solicitous. As cameras flashed, General Tate took the photo album from Harold's hands. "Let me carry this for you, sir." Together they walked toward the front of the hall, the crowd parting before them. What no one heard was the general's quiet words to Harold. "I've been looking for you for 53 years. Vietnam, 1969. Monsoon rain turned the jungle into a muddy hell, as 19-year-old Private Charles Tate lay bleeding from a sniper's bullet that had torn through his thigh. The extraction point was 2 kilometers away, and his unit had been ordered to fall back under heavy fire. As enemy soldiers closed in, Specialist Harold Dempsey, already wounded with shrapnel in his back, turned against the flow of retreating men. Despite orders to evacuate, he returned through active gunfire to where Tate lay exposed. "Leave me," Tate had gasped. "It's too late." Harold had simply smiled through gritted teeth. "Not today." He hoisted the younger soldier onto his shoulders and carried him through streams and underbrush, evading enemy patrols for 7 hours until reaching American lines. The last thing Private Tate remembered before losing consciousness was Harold's blood mixing with his own as they collapsed at the medical tent. 3 days later, when Tate awoke in a field hospital, Harold Dempsey had already been shipped to a different base. Their paths never crossed again until today. As the memorial service proceeded, social media exploded. Someone recognized Harold from old Vietnam photographs and posted side-by-side images. Young Harold in combat gear beside a wounded soldier. Elderly Harold, receiving a general's salute. The post went viral within hours. Man almost kicked out of veterans event, saved the general's life 50 years ago. Comments flooded in. Who was the security guard that tried to remove him? Fire him immediately. This is how we treat our heroes. Shameful. Some attendees, who had witnessed Harold's treatment, began posting apologies. I was there and said nothing. I'm ashamed of myself. I watched an old man being humiliated and stayed silent. Never again. By evening, news vans lined the street outside Harold's modest home in East Austin. He closed his curtains and unplugged his rarely used phone. In his small living room, he opened the photo album he'd brought to the ceremony. Pictures of young men in uniforms. Many who never returned home. He hadn't come for recognition or to reunite with Tate. He had simply wanted to honor his fallen friends on the anniversary of their hardest day. The irony wasn't lost on him. After decades of quiet anonymity, he'd become unwillingly famous for an act he considered nothing more than duty. If you've ever been misunderstood simply because you stayed silent, type worthy because true value isn't found on the surface. 1 week later, a black government car with military plates pulled up outside Harold's small bungalow. A uniformed aide delivered a sealed envelope bearing the Pentagon's official crest. Inside was a formal invitation. The Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff request the honor of your presence at a special recognition ceremony. Washington, D.C. 3 days, Harold almost declined. Attention had never been something he sought, but a handwritten note accompanied the invitation. Some debts can never be repaid, but they should at least be acknowledged. Please come, Harold, not for me but for the others who never received their due. The ceremony took place in the Pentagon's inner courtyard, an intimate gathering rather than a public spectacle. Men and women in their 70s and 80s, some in wheelchairs, others standing tall despite their years, greeted Harold with knowing nods and firm handshake. He recognized faces from another lifetime. Soldiers from his unit, medics who had treated his wounds, pilots who had flown extraction missions, people who understood what words could never fully capture. General Tate approached the podium, his dress uniform adorned with decades of service medals. Harold Dempsey is the reason I stand before you today. He began, his voice carrying across the hushed courtyard. He is the reason I had the privilege of serving our country for 40. The reason I met my wife, had children, grandchildren. The general's voice wavered slightly. When I was 19, bleeding out in hostile territory, Harold made a choice that defied logic and self-preservation. He came back for me when orders and common sense dictated otherwise. Harold sat quietly, his weathered hands folded in his lap, as Charles continued. Harold never received the recognition he deserved. His actions were documented in field reports that were classified for decades. By the time those files were accessible, the war had become something many Americans wanted to forget. 2 military aides approached, carrying a polished wooden case. Harold Dempsey never asked for acknowledgement. He never contacted me after the war, never sought recognition or reward. He simply did what was right, and then continued living a quiet life of dignity. The general opened the case, revealing a Distinguished Service Cross, nestled on blue velvet. This medal should have been yours 53 years ago. The paperwork was filed but lost in the chaos of war. Today, we correct that oversight. As Harold stood to receive the medal, every military member present, from 4-star generals to enlisted personnel, rose and rendered a salute. Not because protocol demanded it, but because respect compelled it. After the ceremony, footage of the original museum incident, juxtaposed with the Pentagon honor ceremony, spread across social media platforms. The video garnered over 9 million views in just 48. Harold received hundreds of handwritten letters from school children who had learned about him in class, from veterans who recognized their own unacknowledged sacrifices in his story, from ordinary citizens moved by the delayed justice. A particularly powerful image circulated online. Harold sitting at his kitchen table the morning after the ceremony, in his bathrobe, reading the newspaper with his medal case closed on the countertop. The caption read, "Heroes don't need to tell you they're heroes." When reporters asked how it felt to finally receive recognition, Harold's response was characteristically straightforward. "The medal is nice, seeing old friends was better." He returned to his daily routine. Morning coffee, tending his small garden, reading the newspaper front to back. The only visible change was a newly installed flagpole in his front yard, where he raised and lowered the American flag each day with the same precision he had learned as a young recruit 6 decades earlier. If you believe true honor never needs to be demanded, type salute, because those who deserve it always receive it in the end. Harold declined every television interview request. The only media access he granted was to a 6th grade history class from East Austin Elementary, who visited his home for their local Heroes project. They sat in his backyard under an old oak tree. 12 children with notebooks and wide eyes asking questions that adults were too polished to pose. A boy with glasses raised his hand. Were you scared when you went back for the soldier? Harold smiled, terrified. Then why did you do it? Because I was more afraid of living the rest of my life knowing I did nothing when someone needed me. Another child asked what it felt like to be famous now. I'm not famous, Harold corrected gently. I'm just an old man who people happen to notice for a minute. Next week they'll notice someone else. But the notice wasn't as fleeting as Harold predicted. The Austin Military Museum created a small permanent exhibit, called Dempsey's Corner. It featured a row of seats reserved specifically for veterans, who had never received formal recognition. Those without medals or citations, but who had served with quiet honor. The placard read simply, "No reservation needed. Your presence is distinction." And 3 university scholarships were established in Harold's name, designated for children of veterans. The requirements were unusual. Applicants needed to demonstrate not academic excellence or athletic prowess, but proven acts of standing up for others when it would have been easier to walk away. When the first recipients were announced, Harold attended the small ceremony. He shook each student's hand and said the same thing to each: make it count. In his kitchen drawer, alongside bills and grocery lists, Harold kept a letter from General Tate that he read off. The final paragraph stayed with him. You taught me without words that our most important choices are made when no one is watching, when no reward is promised, when doing the right thing may cost everything. Whatever good I've accomplished in my life grew from the seed of that lesson. Thank you for the 5 more decades that weren't originally mine to have. Harold didn't need anyone to remember his name. He just wanted to arrive on time, take his seat, and honor those who never came home. Yet that quiet dignity made even a 4-star general stop in his tracks. As Harold lowered the flag that evening, a gust of wind stirred the silence. He looked up and whispered a quiet promise to those long gone, that their stories would live on, not in textbooks or ceremonies, but in moments of quiet dignity and in the eyes of those who choose to see. That was the legacy he carried, stitched into memory, not medals. True honor needs no announcement. It requires only that we stand up at the right moment. Sometimes the loudest statements are made without a single word, just the willingness to return for someone when everyone else is running away. The bravest acts often leave no witnesses, except those who live because of them. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories, because some stories only need to be told once to be remembered forever. We told their story, you gave it meaning.